Good evening, everyone. So I'm Daniel Quan. I'm an associate at WSP in the Future Mobility and Transport Planning team. Tonight, I've been asked to do a short presentation on what we're calling the user-centric approach, but also known as user-centered design. I'll briefly talk about what the design process is, the challenges, and why to adopt a user-centric approach, a short summary on the considerations, and then an example of how we've used it in a project. So before we get started, some definitions. So user-centric or human-centered design is really a mindset where we as practitioners think about the end user needs and the solutions that will be relevant or beneficial to them in the long run. So really what we mean by this is putting ourselves in the shoes of the residents or the people that we're designing for. What might they want? What might they need? And how might they travel? A tool to do that is to use design thinking. So really, this is a process to create solutions to help us understand what people will need. So we've got the divergent thinking and the convergent thinking, and really there's 4 steps. So there's empathize. So really put yourself in the shoes of your users. Define the problems. Ideate. So what are the solutions to address the problems, and then to test and iterate your solutions. So refine, gather data to really understand how your solutions are working and how effective they are. So that was a little bit about the human-centered design, but really, why are we designing for this? And the big problem or the big challenge for transport at the moment is how are we going to decarbonize the network going forward? The government's provided quite a strong policy context. So as you can see with the suite of policies and strategies there, the challenge for us as practitioners is really how do we implement this policy? How do we achieve the intentions that the government has? So my question to you guys is, will the standard industry practice that we kind of adopt at the moment, will it help us to achieve to achieve net zero? I mean, we have the predict and provide methodology. Are we continuing to design for car dependence? So things like, as Katja brought up at the beginning, parking minimums, driveway parking, data availability. A lot of our decision making is done on census data, but that's from 2011. The world has moved on quite a lot since then. Limited public sector resources where there's an inability because of the lack of resources to try new things. You've just got to keep doing what you've always done. Consultation seen as a tick box exercise when really consultation is at the center of human-centered design, and then an outdated developer offering. So as I mentioned, user-centric is really about planning for people and planning for places. So when we're thinking about the people, who are these people that we are talking about? The young, the elderly, people different life stages and events, different genders, those that are socially and financially excluded, the less abled, and the wider society in general. So ordinarily, we'd be planning for the majority, but what we're trying through human-centered design is to plan for all. Again, we've got to think about the different places and the activities that are taking place. So retail and leisure, healthcare, workplace and employment, education, deliveries, and then thinking about the difference between rural, peri-urban, and urban. So this is a bit of a flowchart in terms of the thought process behind user-centric. So initially, who might live or work or visit the site that we've got as the project? How might they travel now and how might they travel into the future? How effective are the different mobility services that we are implementing at meeting the challenges both now and into the future? And applying that through user-centric. And then the last bit is the scheme design, monitoring post-occupation, and then service optimization. So that constant loop to optimize and improve the services or the initiatives that we are implementing. This is just some tools and methods that form part of the user-centric design, and this is actually from an Australian Victorian government document. Some methods that we use at WSP are so obviously socio-demographic and propensity analysis using things like Mosaic, small focus interviews or focus groups, and the one that I'm going to focus on next, online surveys, which are really useful, and especially probably more useful now that we're in COVID, where we have less opportunity for face-to-face interaction. So this is a short application of the user-centric methodology. So for the Otterpool Park project in Kent, we undertook a online survey. There we had over 2,600 respondents, both from London and Kent. So Otterpool Park is a greenfield development. There's not that much housing there at the moment. But what we were trying to do is understand who are the people that might live in Otterpool Park, how might they travel, and what would their lives be like once they moved in. And in order to do that, we did the survey of people that might move there, so people living within London and Kent. The survey provides us with a very rich data set of our potential residents, and it really helped us to inform things like mode shares and the resulting number of trips. So what I mean by that is understanding what are the internal trips, the external trips, and using the survey data that we gathered to apply mode shares. It's also helped us with defining and refining the car parking rates provision, and I'll go to that on the next slide. But understanding things like what are the proportion of car-free households, what's the level of vehicle ownership at the moment, and then the other point is mobility provision more generally. So things like public transport, micromobility, car clubs, mobility hubs, and freight and servicing. We have a lot of questions in there asking people about how much they own, how much they use, what are their preferences, what are their pain points when with mobility. So over the page, I think you guys might find this quite interesting, especially considering we're focused on parking tonight. So the top table is taken from that user-centric survey, so the 2,600 people. And it's working out the proportion of car-free households. So the rows down the left are flats, houses, and the combined, so the total. And then looking at Kent, London, and then the combined of London and Kent. So what's quite interesting is that, for example, 34% of respondents who live in a flat are car-free households. In London, that rises to 57%. The table below that is an estimate of the average number of vehicles per dwelling, and again, split out between flat, house, and total, and then Kent, London, and London and Kent. And as you would expect, Kent has a higher car parking rate than London. So 0.8, so on average, it's 0.8 for flats in Kent and drops down to 0.3 in London. This data has been really, really useful to help us sort of benchmark and understand where to set the car parking rates, because obviously this level of car ownership is a lot lower than the parking maximums that are required in the local authority. Over the page, so yes, this is just a summary of a vision that we developed based on the surveys. So for example, we want to implement things like consolidated vehicle parking, a lot of car club and hire services, active travel, and then some interesting points is that 1 in 2 people are willing to pay a premium for driveway parking. 75% of respondents would be open to an all-inclusive rental offer. So this would be mobility as a service, where you would have car clubs, e-scooters, e-bikes, and potentially even your electricity all lumped together. And there's, that's it all in a bit of a summary. I talked a bit about the human-centered design, and how we've applied that at Otterpool. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Daniel. I mean, I think looking at the statistics, what you have just said, what Simon has said, I do wonder why the parking standards are actually so high, because the data seems to suggest something different. I think also an interesting point, which we could pick up in the debate, is about people choosing to pay for parking. I mean, at the moment here, it is, you know, parking is seen as a kind of, Simon said, it's a freebie that comes with your unit, your house, your flat, but that's not the case, certainly not the case in kind of my home country in Germany, where people choose and pay extra if they want a car park. So there's a whole different incentive behind it. Again, lots of points for discussion, and yeah, the chat is very busy. So post your questions there. I'm sure there are kind of lots of questions out there.